United States at war. Our pilots at risk.
But I didn't know if I was right side up or upside down.
On a training mission, Brian Udell's disabled jet was plunging nose first toward the Atlantic Ocean at supersonic speed.
When I pulled those handles, you're making that choice that, hey, we're trying to save our lives here.
No military pilot has ever survived an ejection at Udell's speed, estimated at up to 800 miles an hour. It was like hitting a wall.
It ripped my helmet mask right off my head. Blew the earplugs right out of my ears, broke all the blood vessels in my head and face. My head was swollen the size of a basketball, and my lips were the size of cucumbers.
And his body was tossed like a rag doll.
My left leg took this bar, and it bent it out about 45 degrees, about out to here. And when my leg couldn't go out any further, right here at the bottom part, my leg snapped.
His other leg nearly severed, his left arm broken. Udell parachutes into the ocean. And for the first time, he thinks about what's happened.
You know, I've got a wife who's 4 months pregnant with our first child, and I don't want to die out here.
A seat made in Phoenix, never tested at supersonic speeds, made sure Udell would see his family again.
I owe my life to you guys. I mean, that's the way it is, you know. Thanks.
For 12 News, Bram Resnick of the Arizona Republic.
When you're out of control and you've got only seconds to spare, there's just one thing between you and certain death. Your ejection seat.
Had I waited even a half a second longer to pull the ejection handles, I would have hit the water.
I quickly checked the instruments, and boom, I didn't have time to say one single word.
I'm engulfed in flames. I'm on fire, and my face is being burned. I have no idea if this is going to function or if I'm just going to die in this burning coffin in the sky.
Reaches down between his legs and pulls the handle on his ejection seat. A split second later, the plane explodes into flames, but the pilot's floating to Earth safely beneath a parachute. Pilots only turn to their ejection seat when things get really bad. The lives of 10,000 pilots from 90 air forces around the world have been saved by aircraft ejection systems. Captain Brian Udell of the U.S. Air Force survived ejection at over the speed of sound. He lived, but only just.
People don't understand what wind does to someone at that speed. You stick your hand as you're driving down the highway, stick it out the car window, and it'll blow it back. And that's at 60 miles an hour. Imagine doing 800 miles an hour and what that will do. It starts ripping you apart.
Udell and his weapons officer, Captain Dennis White, were assigned to fly their two-seat F-15 on a combat training mission. They were joined by another F-15 and took off from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. They both flew out over the Atlantic Ocean and began an exercise which involved chasing each other around in tighter and tighter circles.
My goal was just to do a nice 360-degree around the circle turn. About 90 degrees through the turn, we started hearing wind rushing over the canopy. And it was like, what's going on? We were going up over 600 knots at this point, right at the verge of supersonic.
In a split second, Udell realized he was losing control of his F-15.
I didn't know if I was upside down or right side up. I had no way of telling where the nearest horizon was. From 17,000 feet to 10,000 feet went by in about 5 seconds. When I saw 10,000 feet go by and we're now supersonic, coming up on 800 miles an hour, I commanded to bail out.
Udell and his navigator pulled the handles on their ejection seats, not knowing whether they'd hit the water before their chutes opened.
I left the cockpit at 3,000 feet and I got my parachute at less than 1,000 feet. Had I waited even a half a second longer to pull the ejection handles, I would have hit the water still in my seat. It felt like somebody had just hit me with a train. When I went out into the wind stream, it ripped my helmet right off of my head, broke all the blood vessels in my head and face. My head was swollen the size of a basketball, and my lips were the size of cucumbers. My left elbow was dislocated and pointed backwards. The only thing holding my leg on was an artery, the vein, the nerve, and the skin. And my left leg snapped at the bottom half. I found myself exhausted, hanging in a parachute. I could feel the cool night air on my face. I could hear the parachute ruffling above me.
When pilots pilots eject, their seats automatically deploy a one-man life raft just in case, like Udall, they eject over water.
I had just grabbed a hold of the life raft. I hit the water. I went to kick my legs to try to get in. Well, when I went to kick my legs, the bottom half of my legs were just flopping. This arm's bent backwards, my legs are flopping, and I've got one arm that I'm holding onto this life raft with. And I thought, you know, I'm going to die out here tonight.
He knows he only has minutes to climb into his life raft before the freezing ocean kills him.
I stopped everything. I started praying. I said, God, I need some help. I tried one more time to get in the raft just by using my one arm without kicking my legs, and I managed to get right in.
It took just seconds for Udall to eject and hit the water, but it took 4 long hours for the first search and rescue planes to find him. When he finally reached the hospital, his thoughts turned to his navigator.
The next day, around noon, they came in and they told me that they had found his body, that he had been killed instantly upon ejection. And that was a tough thing. When you make that decision to eject, you're doing it to try to save your life. And when one guy doesn't make it, it's pretty tough.
Nobody knows what went wrong with Udall's F-15. The plane disintegrated when it hit the ocean. Udall's experience is testament to the fact that being a fighter pilot carries enormous risks. Hidden away in the Arizona desert, Luke Air Force Base is home to the largest F-16 fighter wing in the world. Pilots in training fly in a special 2-seater F-16. Major Julian Chestnut was flying one of these when his engine exploded just after takeoff.
Passing about 400 feet, we gave the ejection command, which is bail out, bail out, bail out. We both pulled our ejection handle simultaneously. We went up the rails at the same time, and unfortunately my drogue chute cover fired into his canopy. Mine opened up, his did not. By the grace of God, he went right through my risers. He wrapped around my risers a couple times and was so entangled in my risers that he was able to stay attached to me. Our jet was only about 200 feet away in a smoking hole on fire. Had we not become entangled, had we sequenced our ejection properly, then the extra half a second delay that I would have experienced was enough to put me right in the fireball.
Few ejections are more harrowing than an upside-down ejection, as Marine Captain John Walsh discovered during a Desert Storm combat mission. His Harrier was hit by an Iraqi anti-aircraft missile and went out of control.
It's a very violent experience. I was hit during my 39th mission on the second day of the ground war, and I made it south across friendly lines before I got out, but I was trying to divert into a field we'd recently overrun, and I ended up ejecting at 900 feet upside down. But this is the stencil seat in this aircraft. I think it's the finest in the world. A system in the aircraft knows its attitude, directs the seat so it won't shoot you down into the ground. I went out the side, and we get a shoot immediately. There's actually a ballistic spreader. It's like an explosive that spreads the canopy open immediately, so you get a shoot right away, and you're hanging in the chute as quick as you can blink your eye. When I went out, we lift our head for proper spinal cord positioning, but I remember seeing a flash, then I remember seeing a flame between my feet as a rocket motor was throwing me out. It felt like 100 hands were tearing at my flight suit trying to the wind blast. Then I felt the chute open, and the opening shock was quite severe. It really knocks you for a loop. I saw a lot of stars. But next thing I know, I was hanging in the chute about a second and a half later, and thinking to myself, well, I'm along for the ride. I hope the seat works, and it did. And I hit the ground. Luckily, the sand was soft because I hit pretty hard. But I got up and started running south, and felt pretty good about that seat. Wanted to go back and get it, but had to leave it out there.
They have an amazing survival story to tell. A B-1 bomber pilot who ejected from his plane and a crew member who saved him are talking about their close call. This animation shows how the two pilots ejected from the aircraft when it experienced mechanical malfunctions near the island of Diego Garcia. The B-1 bomber went down in the Indian Ocean, and U.S. Navy ships rescued the crew of 4 a short time later. Remarkably, they suffered only minor injuries.
I look like I've been in a bar brawl and beaten up by about 10 guys, and so do the rest of the crew members. But really, it's just a bunch of bruises, and we're all doing very well.
The bomber went down as the crew was trying to get back to base on Diego Garcia. The pilot says the aircraft was impossible to fly.